At the family gathering, my sister declared, "Sign the deed to the $25 million estate over to me right now." When I refused, my mother angrily slapped me in front of everyone. She said, "You have no other choice. Do as you are told." The lawyer stared at her and whispered, "Do you know who actually controls the money?" Immediately, the entire room fell silent. My name is Zara, and at 32 years old, I never expected my grandfather's funeral to turn into a crime scene of greed. But when $25 million is on the table, family loyalty is usually the first casualty. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against family members who underestimated you. The air in our Oak Bluffs summer home usually smelled of salt water and pine, a sanctuary for our family for 3 generations. Today, however, it choked on the suffocating scent of white lilies and expensive designer perfume. My grandfather Otis was not even in the ground yet. His casket sat in the parlor surrounded by wreaths that cost more than most people make in a month. I stood by the bay window, watching the elite of Martha Vineyard circulate. They held crystal flutes of champagne, murmuring rehearsed condolences, but their eyes were darting around the room, appraising the antique furniture and the panoramic ocean view. They were not here to mourn a community pillar. They were vultures circling a carcass, waiting to see who would get the biggest piece of meat. My sister Bianca stood near the marble fireplace, looking every inch the grieving golden child in her custom black silk dress. But it was her husband, Hunter, who drew my attention. He was leaning close to her ear, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. From a distance, it looked like a gesture of comfort, but I saw the tension in his jaw. I saw the way his fingers dug into her fabric. He was not comforting her. He was coaching her. Hunter was the only white man in the room, a hedge fund manager who always tried too hard to fit into our world, but today, the mask had slipped. His blue eyes were cold, calculating, and fixed on the deed to the house that sat on the hallway table. I saw him whisper something sharp into Bianca's ear. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward me with a mix of fear and arrogance. Hunter squeezed her arm again, harder this time. I saw her wince. "Do it now," his body language screamed. The disrespect was visceral. Our grandfather body was literally 10 feet away, and they were plotting a takeover. Bianca took a shaky breath, straightened her spine, and raised a silver spoon to her champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, piercing sound cut through the low hum of conversation. The room went quiet. The soft jazz music stopped. 50 faces, including senators, doctors, and lawyers, turned toward her. My mother, Patricia, looked up from her handkerchief, her eyes dry and expectant. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was not going to be a toast to our grandfather memory. This was a declaration of war. "Excuse me, everyone," Bianca announced, her voice trembling with a mix of adrenaline and faux sorrow. She reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been printed at a home office 5 minutes ago. This is not how we usually do things, but given the circumstances, Hunter and I want to ensure the estate is preserved correctly. She walked toward me, the heels of her shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood floor like a countdown. She thrust the paper and a gold pen toward my chest. "Zara, sweetie, just sign this. It transfers the headache of the property management to us. You're single and living in that small apartment in Atlanta. You do not need the burden of a $25 million estate. Hunter and I are ready to take that weight off your shoulders. I looked down at the document. It was a quitclaim deed. It was not even on legal stationery. It was a generic form likely downloaded from the internet, with the blanks filled in by hand. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic. The arrogance was breathtaking. They thought so little of me that they did not even bother to make the theft look official. I looked at Hunter leaning against the mantel, swirling his drink. He gave me a wink, a gesture so patronizing it made my blood boil. They thought I was the family idiot, the quiet one who filed taxes and did as she was told. They expected me to crumble under the pressure of the public gaze. I did not reach for the pen. I kept my hands firmly at my sides. The room was dead silent. 50 pairs of eyes were burning into my back, waiting for the submission, waiting for the little sister to bow down to the golden child. I looked Bianca dead in the eye, ignoring the paper fluttering in her shaking hand. Do you really think I am that stupid, Bianca? My voice was not loud, but in the quiet room it carried like a shout. You are trying to steal grandfather's legacy with a printout you probably typed up in the car. Bianca gasped, clutching her pearls theatrically as if I had struck her physically. That was when the air shifted. My mother, Patricia, who had been sitting on the velvet sofa, surged forward. She moved with a speed that belied her age and her grief. Before I could step back or raise a hand to defend myself, her palm connected with my face. The sound was sickening, a wet, sharp crack that echoed off the high ceilings. My head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. The sting was immediate, radiating from my cheekbone to my jaw, but the shock was far worse. "You ungrateful little wretch!" my mother screamed, her face contorted in a mask of rage I had never seen in public. "Your sister is trying to save this family, and you want to play lawyer. You have no other choice. Do as you are told. Sign the paper, or you are no daughter of mine." I slowly turned my face back to look at her. My cheek was throbbing, pulsing with heat. I could feel the imprint of her diamond rings on my skin. I looked around the room. The silence was suffocating. These were the pillars of the community: judges, doctors, senators. They watched a mother assault her grieving daughter, and they did nothing. Some looked away, pretending to inspect their shoes. Others, like Mrs. Van Sant, looked at me with cold disdain, as if my refusal to be robbed was the rude behavior, not the slap. They were judging me for disrupting the aesthetic of their afternoon. In their eyes, I was the problem because I refused to be a victim quietly. I looked back at my mother, the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who just drew a line in the sand that could never be uncrossed. I did not cry. Tears would have been a victory for them. I straightened my blazer and met her gaze with a coldness that matched the grave we were standing next to. "You hit me for a piece of paper, Mom. I hope it was worth it. Because that slap just cost you a daughter." I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit without waiting for a response. I did not look back at my father, who was cowering in the corner, staring at his shoes. I smoothed my hair back, ensuring not a single strand was out of place. My dignity was the only thing I had left in that house, and I was not going to leave it behind. As I reached for the brass handle of the front door, a heavy hand slammed against the wood right next to my head, blocking my path. I could smell stale scotch and expensive cologne. It was Hunter. He loomed over me, using his height to try and make me feel small. He leaned in close, his face flushed with alcohol and aggression. "You are making a big mistake, Zara," he sneered, his voice low so the guests would not hear the venom. Do not think you can walk away from this and just disappear. We have lawyers on retainer who eat little tax clerks like you for breakfast. If you do not sign that deed by tomorrow morning, I will make sure you are tied up in litigation until you are bankrupt. You are playing a game you do not understand, with people way out of your league. I looked up at him. I did not see a powerful financier. I saw a desperate man sweating through his custom shirt. I saw the fear behind his blue eyes, the kind of fear that comes when a gambler knows his luck has run out. I stepped around him, refusing to flinch. "Watch me, Hunter," I said softly, my voice cold and steady. "Just watch me." I pushed past him and walked out into the cool night air. The heavy oak door thudded shut behind me, muffling the sounds of the party. I walked to my rental car, my heels crunching on the gravel driveway. It was the only sound in the oppressive silence of the estate. I got into the driver's seat and slammed the door, shutting out the world. The silence inside the car was deafening. My cheeks still throbbed where my mother had hit me, but the pain in my chest was sharper. I looked up at the rearview mirror. My reflection looked back at me, composed but tired. I was 32 years old, and I was effectively an orphan. Not because my parents were dead, but because they had chosen money over me. I started the engine and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It is a strange feeling to realize you are truly alone in the world. It is terrifying, but also strangely liberating. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was driving away to cry in a cheap motel. They did not know that the woman driving away was not the same woman who had walked in. That woman was gone, and the one who replaced her was ready to burn their kingdom to the ground. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the house that was no longer my home, leaving the vultures to feast on the carcass of a family that no longer existed. 3 hours later, I was standing in the center of my living room in downtown Atlanta. The silence here was different. It was not the suffocating judgment of the Oak Bluffs estate. It was the cool, clean silence of power and control. My family thought I lived in a cramped studio apartment, struggling to pay rent on a tax clerk's salary. They imagined me eating instant noodles and worrying about utility bills. I let them believe that. I let them sneer at my off-the-rack suits and my sensible sedan. Invisibility is a superpower when you are surrounded by narcissists. I kicked off my heels and walked across the hand-scraped hickory floors to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Atlanta sprawled out below me, a grid of gold and amber against the darkness. This penthouse was not a gift. It was not an inheritance. I bought it with cash 3 years ago. I poured myself a glass of vintage Cabernet, the kind my brother-in-law pretended to know about, but could never actually afford. I took a slow sip, letting the rich liquid settle my nerves. To my mother and sister, I am just Zara, the boring bureaucrat who files tax returns for small bakeries. They think my job is about forms and deductions. They have no idea that for the last 8 years, I have been hunting predators far more dangerous than them. My name is Zara, and I am a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. I do not just count money, I track it. I trace it through shell companies across international borders. I find the buried assets of drug cartels, corrupt politicians, and Ponzi scheme operators who think they are smarter than the system. I see the patterns in the numbers that others miss. Money always leaves a trail, no matter how deep you try to bury it. And tonight, I was bringing my work home. I sat down at my desk, which looked more like a command center than a home office. 3 high-definition curved monitors hummed to life, casting a blue glow over my face. I cracked my knuckles and logged into the secure server. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, executing the encryption protocols. It was time to look under the hood of Hunter Perfect Life. He had threatened to bankrupt me. He had threatened to bury me in litigation. He had poked a sleeping bear, and he did not even have the common sense to check if the bear had claws. I opened a new case file and typed in a name: Operation Oak Bluffs. I entered Hunter's social security number and hit enter. The screen flooded with data. At first glance, it looked normal. A few credit cards, a car loan, but I knew where to look. I bypassed the surface-level reports and dug into the deep web financial records. The red flags started popping up immediately, like blood in the water. Delaware LLCs, with no employees and no physical address. Wire transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands that coincided perfectly with his quarterly investor meetings. Massive withdrawals from cash machines in Las Vegas casinos. This was not the profile of a successful hedge fund manager. This was the profile of a man drowning in debt and frantically robbing Peter to pay Paul. And then I saw it, the document that made my blood run cold. I pulled up the property records for my mother house in Boston. The house she claimed was paid off 10 years ago. The house she swore was her safety net. The screen showed 3 active mortgages taken out in the last 2 years. The signature on the loan documents was hers, but the notary stamp belonged to a friend of Hunter. He had forged her signature. He had leveraged the roof over her head to feed his gambling addiction. I leaned back in my chair, watching the cursor blink. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time that day. Hunter thought he was holding all the cards because he was a white man in a suit standing in a parlor. He thought he could bully the quiet little sister. He had no idea that I now held the detonator to his entire life. They wanted a war over $25 million. I took another sip of wine. Okay, Hunter. Let us see how you handle a federal audit. I took a deep breath, pushing away the glowing spreadsheet for a moment. To understand why I felt zero guilt about dismantling my brothers-in-law life, you have to understand that this dynamic was not new. It did not start with a property deed or a forged signature. It started 20 years ago in a middle school auditorium that smelled of floor wax and nervous sweat. I was 12 years old, and I had just won the state math Olympiad. I stood on the center of the stage, holding a gold trophy that was nearly half my size. The principal was shaking my hand, the audience was clapping, and the flashbulbs from the local newspaper were popping. But my eyes were fixed on 2 empty seats in the front row. Seats that I had reserved with handwritten signs that said, Mom and Dad. I stood there smiling for the cameras while my heart quietly broke inside my chest. I held that smile until my cheeks hurt because I knew even then that crying would only make me look weak. When I got home later that evening, carrying my trophy and riding in the back of my math teacher's car, the house was in chaos. I walked into the living room expecting an apology or maybe a late celebration. Instead, I tripped over a suitcase overflowing with pink tulle and rhinestones. My mother was running around with a can of hairspray like a soldier with a weapon, and Bianca was standing on the coffee table crying because her tiara was pinching her head. Mom, where were you? I asked, my voice small in the frantic room. I won. I got first place. My mother did not even look at me. She sprayed a cloud of hairspray at Bianca's head and sighed. Not now, Zara. Your sister is having a crisis. We had to rush to the Little Miss Georgia pageant because the stylist canceled. Do not be selfish. This is Bianca's big night. Selfish. That was the word they always used. It was selfish of me to expect my parents to attend my academic events when Bianca needed a ride to dance class. It was selfish of me to want a birthday party when Bianca needed a new costume. I stood there clutching my math trophy, realizing that in the economy of my family, my achievements were worthless currency. Bianca's beauty was the gold standard, and I was just the inflation that ate away at their resources. "Put that thing down and come help me steam this sash," my mother ordered, pointing at the ironing board. "And get your sister some juice. She is dehydrated from crying." I remember setting my trophy down on the floor because there was no space on the table. It sat there next to the dog bowl while I spent the rest of the night ironing a sash that said Little Miss Sunshine. That was the night the dynamic was set in stone. Bianca was the star. She was the fragile, precious thing that needed to be protected and admired. I was the crew. I was the help. I was the shadow that made the light shine brighter. I learned to be invisible, and I learned to be useful. But I also learned something else that night as I watched my mother fawn over Bianca's fake smile. I learned that if I wanted to survive, I had to stop waiting for them to clap for me. I had to learn how to win in silence. My suspicion of Hunter did not begin with the forged mortgage documents or the secret bank accounts. It began the very first moment he walked into our lives 3 years ago. The setting was Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house, a sacred tradition in our family where the menu had not changed for 2 generations. Bianca arrived late, as usual, making a grand entrance with Hunter on her arm. He was the physical embodiment of everything my parents desperately wanted to be associated with. Tall, blonde, and radiating the kind of easy, unearned confidence that comes from a lifetime of never being told no. He wore a bespoke navy suit that screamed Wall Street, and before he had even taken off his coat, he was already talking about the market. He dominated the room, sucking the oxygen out of the conversation. He spoke in rapid-fire financial jargon, throwing around terms like leverage and short selling and liquidity events. My father, who had built his wealth through slow, steady real estate accumulation, sat there nodding enthusiastically, completely captivated. My mother was practically beaming, pouring him drinks and hanging on his every word. They did not see a man. They saw a trophy. They saw a white son-in-law who could legitimize their social climbing in a way that money alone never could. But I was sitting across the table, and I was not looking at his smile. I was looking at his wrist. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to notice the details that others miss. The devil is always in the details. When Hunter reached across the table to grab a roll, his cuff rode up, revealing a Rolex Daytona. To the untrained eye, it was a $30,000 timepiece. It had the right weight and the right shine. But I caught the way the light hit the ceramic bezel. The font on the tachymeter was off by a fraction of a millimeter. The second hand had a microscopic stutter that a genuine Swiss movement would never have. It was a superclone. A high-end replica that cost maybe $500, but was designed to fool everyone in the room. That watch told me everything I needed to know about Hunter. He was a fraud. He was projecting an image of wealth that he did not actually possess. If he was willing to fake his success on his wrist, what else was he faking? As the night went on, his mask began to slip in other ways, too. There was a subtle undercurrent of disdain in the way he interacted with us. He treated my father not as an equal, but with the patronizing tone one might use with a child. He made backhanded comments about the food, calling my grandmother's collard greens interesting, and asking with a smirk if we put hot sauce on everything. It was not overt racism. It was something more insidious. It was the arrogance of an outsider who believed he was doing us a favor by being there. He looked at our art, our furniture, and our traditions with the critical eye of an appraiser looking for value to extract. My parents were too enamored to see it. They were so desperate for his validation that they ignored the disrespect. But I saw it. I saw the way he looked at Bianca when she talked too loud. A flash of irritation that disappeared as quickly as it came. I saw a predator who had found the perfect prey, a wealthy family with deep insecurities and a desperate need for approval. That night, while my parents toasted to the happy couple, I drank my wine in silence, knowing that he was not here to join our family. He was here to liquidate it. Back in the present, inside the cool, air-conditioned sanctuary of my Atlanta penthouse, the silence was broken only by the relentless buzzing of my smartphone. It danced across the glass surface of my desk like an angry hornet, vibrating against the expensive mahogany. I did not need to pick it up to know what was happening. The smear campaign had begun. My mother had clearly wasted no time in activating the family gossip network immediately after I drove away from the funeral. I watched the notifications stack up on the lock screen. There was a text from Auntie Bernice asking how I could be so cruel to my own flesh and blood. There was a long, rambling message from Cousin Marcus calling me a thief and telling me I should be ashamed of myself. Even the pastor of our family church had sent a message urging me to search my heart and find the path of forgiveness. They were the flying monkeys sent by the wicked witch to do her bidding. They did not know the truth. They only knew the tearful, curated version my mother had fed them. She probably told them I was evicting her onto the street, leaving out the part where she slapped me or where her son-in-law threatened to destroy me. I felt a pang of isolation. These were people I grew up with, people I had shared Sunday dinners with. In the span of 3 hours, my mother had turned them all into weapons against me. But I did not reply. I did not try to defend myself. I knew that arguing with a narcissist enablers is like trying to explain color to the blind. Then came the notification I was actually waiting for. A priority email popped up on my center monitor. The subject line was written in aggressive all caps, regarding the estate of Otis Jenkins, immediate legal action. It was from a law firm I recognized. Not because they were prestigious, but because they were notorious for being aggressive ambulance chasers who would sue anyone for the right price. Hunter had called in the cavalry. I opened the attachment. It was a cease and desist letter combined with a threat of a civil lawsuit. The accusations were breathtaking in their projection. They were accusing me of undue influence. The letter claimed that in the final years of his life, I had manipulated my grandfather, taking advantage of his declining mental state to alter his estate planning. They called it elder abuse. I laughed out loud, a harsh, dry sound in the empty room. Grandfather Otis was sharp as a tack until the day he died. He did the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink every morning. I had visited him once a month to check on his health, while Bianca and my mother ignored him for years unless they needed a loan. Now, they were rewriting history. They were taking their own sins, neglect, manipulation, and greed, and painting them onto me. This is textbook gaslighting. When they cannot control you, they try to control how others see you. They were trying to make me doubt my own reality. I did not delete the texts. I did not delete the email. I dragged every single one of them into a secure folder named Evidence. If they wanted to talk about undue influence, I was more than happy to have that conversation. But we were not going to have it in a civil court where they could settle for money. We were going to have it in a criminal court where the currency was prison time. I turned back to my spreadsheet. The legal threat was just a distraction. The real smoking gun was buried in the numbers, and I was about to find it. I minimized the threatening email and opened the secure portal to the county property records database. My hands were steady now. The anger from the funeral had crystallized into a cold, hard focus. In my line of work, we call this the discovery phase. It is the moment when the narrative stops mattering and the facts begin to scream. Hunter wanted to sue me for undue influence over my grandfather. He wanted to claim I was manipulating the family. It was a classic projection tactic. Criminals always accuse you of exactly what they are doing themselves. I started with a simple title search on my parents' primary residence in Atlanta. It was a beautiful colonial house in Buckhead, the one I grew up in. My father had paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. It was their nest egg, their safety net, and the symbol of their status in the community. My mother often bragged at church that she owned her home free and clear. I typed in the address and hit search, expecting to see a clean title history. The screen refreshed and my breath caught in my throat. There were 3 active liens against the property. 3. The first one was dated 18 months ago for $500,000 from a legitimate bank. The second was 6 months later for $300,000 from a secondary lender with higher interest rates. The third was just 4 weeks ago. It was a hard money loan for $200,000 from a company called Quick Cash LLC with an interest rate that bordered on usury. I felt a wave of nausea. My parents did not own their home anymore. The bank owned it. The secondary lender owned it. And some predatory loan shark owned the rest. They were technically underwater. If the market dipped even 2%, they would be insolvent. I clicked on the scanned documents for the most recent loan. I needed to see the signatures. There, at the bottom of the page, was my mother's signature, Patricia Jenkins. It looked right at first glance. The loops were there, the slant was correct. But forensic accounting is not about glancing. It is about dissecting. I pulled up a reference sample of my mother's signature from an old birthday card I had saved. I overlaid the 2 images on my screen and zoomed in until the pixels blurred. The pressure points were wrong. My mother was left-handed, and she dragged her pen slightly on the upstroke of the J. The signature on the loan document was heavy on the downstroke. It was drawn, not written. It was a tracing. Then I looked at the notary stamp. It belonged to a man named Marcus Thorne. I ran his name through my social media scraping tool. It took 3 seconds to find a photo of him on Instagram. There he was, arm in arm with Hunter at a golf course in Hilton Head, holding a cigar and smiling like a co-conspirator. Hunter had forged my mother's signature to strip the equity out of her own home, and he had used his friend to notarize the fraud. My mother, the woman who had slapped me to protect Hunter, was currently living in a house she no longer owned, protecting the man who had stolen it from under her feet. I sat back in my chair and let the magnitude of the betrayal sink in. This was not just greed. This was financial elder abuse, and I had just found the smoking gun that would put Hunter in federal prison. I sat there, staring at the digital evidence of my mother's financial ruin until the pixels seemed to burn into my retinas. Hunter had not just stolen from her. He had enslaved her to debt without her knowledge. I was about to close the file when my phone lit up again. This time, it was not a text. It was a call. The caller ID read, "Mom." I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the decline button. After the slap and the public humiliation, I had every right to send her to voicemail forever. But curiosity is a professional hazard for a forensic accountant. I needed to know what their next move was. I answered, but said nothing. I just held the phone to my ear and waited. "Zara, is that you?" My mother's voice was barely a whisper. It sounded frail, trembling with a weakness I had never heard before. "Please do not hang up. I have been up all night with chest pains. I think the stress is killing me." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes narrowing. My mother was a woman who could command a room with a single look. This sudden fragility felt scripted. It felt like a performance designed to disarm me. "I am listening, Mom," I said, my voice neutral. I did not ask if she was okay. I did not offer sympathy. I just held the line. "I know we said things we did not mean," she continued, letting out a ragged sigh. "But Sunday service is tomorrow. It is a special memorial for your grandfather. Pastor Williams is going to dedicate the sermon to him. I want you there, Zara. We need to be a united family in the house of God. Please, do it for your grandfather, if not for me." The mention of my grandfather was the hook. She knew I adored him. She knew I would feel guilty if I missed a service in his honor. But I also knew my mother. She did not do random acts of piety. If she wanted me at church, it was because she had an audience. She wanted a public display of reconciliation to save face in front of the community. Or worse, she had something planned. I looked at the forged loan document on my screen. If I went, I would be walking into a lion's den. But if I stayed away, I would be blind to their strategy. In my line of work, you never turn down an opportunity to gather intelligence. If they wanted a family reunion, I would give them one. But I would be wearing a wire. "Fine," I said. "I will be there. But just for the service, Mom. I am not coming to lunch. I am not signing anything." "Thank you, baby," she said, and her voice suddenly sounded remarkably stronger, remarkably less frail. "Just wear something nice. We want to look our best for the Lord." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at my reflection in the dark window. She had dropped the act the second she got what she wanted. The frailty was a costume. The chest pains were a lie. She was luring me into a trap. I could feel it in my gut the same way I felt it when a CEO smiled too much during an audit. I stood up and walked to my closet. If I was going to war in the house of God, I needed to dress the part. I pushed aside the soft florals and pastels my mother always insisted I wear. I reached for a sharp, tailored black suit. It was severe. It was professional. It was armor. "I am coming, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "But I am not coming to pray. I am coming to pray." Sunday morning in Atlanta is a spectacle. It is not just about worship. It is a fashion show and a political arena wrapped in scripture. I walked into the Greater Ebenezer Cathedral wearing my sharp black suit, feeling less like a congregant and more like a defendant entering a courtroom. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the heavy humidity of 1,000 bodies swaying to the organ music. I saw my family sitting in the front pew, the VIP section reserved for the biggest donors. My mother was wearing a wide-brimmed hat that obscured her face, but I could see her shoulders shaking. She was already in character. I took a seat in the back row, hoping to remain invisible, but in a congregation this tight-knit, anonymity is impossible. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the pews like a wave. I kept my eyes forward, fixed on the pulpit where Pastor Williams stood, wiping sweat from his brow. I knew for a fact that Hunter had made a significant anonymous donation to the church building fund just yesterday. I was about to find out exactly what that money had bought him. The service began normally enough with hymns and announcements, but then the tone shifted. Pastor Williams did not open his Bible to the Psalms. He leaned over the wooden podium, his voice dropping to a somber baritone. "Today, church, we need to talk about a sickness in our community." He paused for effect, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "We talk about the devil out there in the streets, but what about the devil inside our own homes? What about the children who bite the hand that fed them?" My stomach tightened. He was not preaching. He was prosecuting. He paced back and forth, working the crowd into a frenzy. "The Bible says, 'Honor thy father and thy mother.' It does not say, 'Honor them only when it is convenient.' It does not say, 'Rob them of their legacy when they are grieving.'" I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. He was not using my name, but he did not have to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. He looked directly at the back of the room, directly at me, and shouted, "There is no sin greater than a child who abandons their widow mother for the love of money." That was the cue. My mother stood up slowly, clutching a handkerchief to her chest. The organist began to play a soft, mournful melody. She walked to the microphone stand, her steps faltering as if she could barely hold herself up. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She looked out at the congregation, tears streaming down her face. "Please, pray for my family," she sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly into the microphone. "I tried to raise my children right. I gave them everything. But the devil has hardened my daughter Zara's heart." She paused to let the congregation gasp. "My father just passed away, and instead of comforting us, she is trying to put us out on the street. She has seized the estate. She has left her sister and her new baby with nothing. I do not know where I failed her, but please pray that God softens her heart before she destroys this family completely." The church erupted. Shouts of shame and prayer filled the air. 1,000 eyes turned to look at me. The judgment was physical. It felt like a weight crushing my chest. I saw old Mrs. Gable shaking her head at me in disgust. I saw the ushers whispering and pointing. And in the front row, I saw Hunter. He was not looking at the pastor. He was looking back at me with a smug, satisfied smirk. He had weaponized my own community against me. He had turned the one place that was supposed to be a sanctuary into a public execution of my character. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to run down the aisle weeping and begging for forgiveness and sign that deed just to make the pain stop. But as I looked at my mother's theatrical tears and Hunter's triumphant grin, something inside me snapped. I was done being the victim. If they wanted a show, I would give them a show. The organ music swelled dramatically, scoring my public execution. My mother was sobbing into the microphone, her performance worthy of an Academy Award. Hunter was smirking, believing he had finally crushed me under the weight of social pressure. They expected me to shrink. They expected me to run out of the double doors in shame, just like I had done at the funeral. But they forgot one crucial detail. I was not that scared little girl anymore. I was a federal investigator who stared down cartel bosses for a living. Hunter and his rented suit did not scare me. I stood up. The movement was sudden and sharp. The whispers in the room died down, instantly replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. I did not walk toward the exit. I walked toward the pulpit. I saw the panic flash in Pastor Williams' eyes. He stepped back as I approached the altar, his grip on the Bible loosening. My mother stopped crying mid-sob, her eyes widening in genuine alarm. She reached out to grab my arm, but I sidestepped her with the grace of a matador. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whine pierced the air, making everyone wince, but I did not care. I looked out at the sea of faces. These were people I had known my whole life, people who were ready to condemn me based on a lie. I turned to the pastor, ignoring my mother, who was now frozen in shock. "Pastor Williams," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, calm and cold. "You speak so passionately about financial stewardship today. You speak about the sin of greed and the importance of honoring the family. I think that is a beautiful message. It reminds me of the generous donation my brother-in-law Hunter made to the building fund yesterday." I saw Hunter stiffen in the front row. His smirk vanished, replaced by a look of wary confusion. The congregation murmured in approval, nodding at his generosity. I continued, my eyes locking onto Hunter. $100,000, was it not? To fix the roof and expand the youth center. That is a lot of money for a man to give, especially a man who is so concerned about his wife being left destitute by her greedy sister. I turned back to the congregation, my voice dropping an octave, dangerous and low. "But tell me, Pastor, did the check clear yet? Because in my line of work we have a saying, you cannot give what you do not have, and you certainly cannot give what isn't yours to give." The room went deadly silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Hunter was now standing up, his face a mask of fury, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. My mother looked between us, her confusion morphing into terror as she realized I was going off script. I did not back down. I leaned closer to the mic, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "We are here to honor my grandfather Otis, a man who paid his debts, a man who never pretended to be something he was not. If we want to talk about who is stealing from this family, let us talk about it. Let us open the books. Let us see whose name is really on the deeds and whose signature is on the loans. Let us see who is actually funding this lifestyle and who is just writing checks that are going to bounce." I placed the microphone back on the stand with a deliberate, heavy thud. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a block. I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked down the center aisle, my head held high. The congregation parted like the Red Sea. No one whispered. No one pointed. They were too busy processing the bomb I had just dropped. As I passed the front row, I paused for a fraction of a second next to Hunter. He was trembling with rage, his face a deep shade of crimson. "Check your balance, Hunter," I whispered, so only he could hear. "I think your charity is about to be declined." Hunter did not offer a rebuttal. He knew that any word he spoke would only dig his grave deeper. Instead, he chose violence of a different kind. He reached out and gripped Bianca's upper arm with enough force to make her wince. The fabric of her expensive black dress strained under his fingers. "Get up," he hissed, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "We are leaving. Now." Bianca looked around frantically, her eyes wide with humiliation. She was the queen bee of this social circle, and her husband was dragging her out like an unruly child. She tried to smooth her dress and maintain some dignity, but Hunter yanked her toward the side exit. Her heels skidded on the carpet as she stumbled to keep up with his angry stride. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind them, echoing through the stunned sanctuary like a gunshot. My mother did not leave with them. She remained standing at the pulpit, her hands gripping the wood so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked out at the congregation, who were now whispering feverishly, and then she turned her eyes to me. I expected to see shame. I expected to see fear. But what I saw froze the blood in my veins. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the kind of look you give to a mortal enemy, not the child you birthed. In that moment, I realized that she did not care that Hunter was stealing from her. She did not care that he was a fraud. She only cared that I had exposed the illusion. I had broken the cardinal rule of our family, which was that appearance matters more than truth. I held her gaze for a long moment, letting the finality of it sink in. That look severed the last thin thread of hope I had been clinging to. The small part of me that still wanted my mother's love finally withered and died right there in the center aisle of Greater Ebenezer Cathedral. I turned my back on her and walked out into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The humidity hit me like a physical weight, but for the first time in days, I felt light. The burden of trying to save them was gone. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the churchgoers spill out the front doors. They were already gossiping, pulling out their phones to spread the news of the scandal. I put the car in gear and drove straight back to my penthouse. The drive was silent, but my mind was loud. They had tried to destroy my reputation. They had tried to weaponize my faith and my community against me. They wanted a fight over a house. They wanted a property dispute. They had no idea that they had just declared war on a woman who holds the keys to their freedom. I walked into my apartment and went straight to my server. I did not pour a glass of wine this time. I poured a glass of ice water. I needed to be sharp. I looked at the file named Operation Oak Bluffs. I had been holding back. I had been gathering evidence for defense just in case I needed to protect myself. But defense was over. If they wanted a war, I would not just give them a battle. I would give them a nuclear winter. I opened a new encrypted email channel. I began attaching files. The forged mortgage documents, the Cayman Island wire transfers, the evidence of the Ponzi scheme that was defrauding half the people sitting in that church today. I was not just going to win the estate. I was going to ensure that by the time I was finished, Hunter would be trading his tailored suits for an orange jumpsuit, and my mother would have to answer to the federal government for every dirty dollar she helped him hide. I hit send on the first packet to my contact at the IRS. The war had officially begun. Forensic accounting is often misunderstood. People think I hack into bank vaults like a character in a spy movie wearing a hoodie in a dark room. The reality is much more boring and much more effective. I look for the mistakes that arrogance creates. I look for the patterns that human beings cannot help but repeat. I locked the door to my office and turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the cool blue glow of my 3 monitors. It was time to peel back the layers of Hunter Financial Onion. I started with Quick Cash LLC, the company that held the predatory lien on my mother's house. A quick search of the Georgia Secretary of State database showed it was registered to a generic agent service in Wilmington, Delaware. That is the first wall criminals build. Delaware laws allow for anonymity, so you do not have to list the real owners on public forms. But money has to move, and moving money leaves friction marks. I pulled up the wire transfer history associated with the quick cash funding. The money did not come from a commercial bank. It came from a series of transfers originating from a company called Apex Global Consulting. I typed Apex Global into my proprietary software, which scrapes offshore corporate registries. Bingo. Apex Global was registered in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. This was the classic wash cycle. Hunter was taking money from his investors in the U.S., sending it to the Caymans to scrub it clean, and then loaning it back to my mother at 20% interest. He was effectively stealing from his clients to enslave his mother-in-law. But proving Hunter owned Apex Global was the tricky part. The Caymans do not give up secrets easily. I needed a digital fingerprint. I needed a moment where he got lazy. I started analyzing the metadata of the Apex Global website domain registration. Most pros use a proxy service to hide their identity. Hunter did too. But then I checked the historical DNS records. I scrolled back through 3 years of data. My eyes scanned the lines of code looking for an anomaly. And then I found it. For 3 hours on a Tuesday back in 2021, the privacy protection on the domain had lapsed due to a failed credit card payment. The system had defaulted to the original registrant information. There it was, staring me in the face. For those 3 hours, the administrative contact was listed as Hunter Vanderhoven. He had used his personal Gmail account. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. He had left his digital DNA at the scene of the crime. I took a screenshot and saved it to 3 different hard drives. I now had the irrefutable link between the predatory loan, the offshore account, and the man sitting in my family front row. I was not just looking at simple fraud anymore. I was looking at international money laundering and wire fraud. The prison sentence for this was not measured in months. It was measured in decades. I leaned closer to the screen, my reflection ghostly in the glass. You should have paid the privacy fee, Hunter. That $10 just cost you your freedom. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the flow of funds in the Apex Global ledger. It was a mess of circular transactions designed to look like legitimate investment activity, but to a forensic accountant, it was as clear as a confession letter. I started mapping the incoming wire transfers against the outgoing payments. The pattern was undeniable. Hunter was not investing in emerging markets or tech startups as he claimed in his glossy brochures. He was simply taking money from Investor A to pay the quarterly dividends of Investor B. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. But it was the names on the donor list that made my stomach turn. I recognized them. These were not faceless institutional investors. There was Dr. Evans, the pediatrician who had treated Bianca and me when we were children. There was Mrs. Higgins, the retired school principal who sat 3 pews behind us at church. And most heartbreakingly, there were dozens of Bianca's socialite friends, young women who had trusted their husbands' bonuses or their own inheritance to the charming man at the country club. I pulled up a spreadsheet and started calculating the liquidity gap. It was worse than I thought. Hunter had burned through the initial capital on luxury cars, private jet charters, and that ridiculous watch on his wrist. The hole in his balance sheet was massive. He was currently underwater by $15 million. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the dates. The scheme was starting to wobble. 2 months ago, a major investor had requested a full withdrawal. Hunter had stalled him, claiming market volatility. That was why he was so desperate. That was why he had forged the mortgages on my mother's house. He was plugging leaks on a sinking ship with duct tape. But $500,000 from my mother's house was just a drop in the bucket. He needed a whale. And then it clicked. The $25 million estate. My grandfather property in Martha Vineyard was the only asset large enough to cover the $15 million deficit and leave Hunter with a tidy profit to flee the country. He did not care about the family legacy. He did not care about my mother living on the street. He looked at that house and saw an escape pod. I sat back in my chair, feeling a cold fury settle in my chest. He was going to liquidate 3 generations of black wealth to clean up his own messy criminal failures. He was going to let my sister and mother take the fall when the music stopped. I looked at the numbers glowing on the screen. $15 million. That is a life sentence, Hunter. And you were going to sell us all out to save yourself. I saved the spreadsheet to the encrypted drive. I had the motive. Now I just needed to close the trap. The next morning, the sanctuary of my office was breached. My receptionist buzzed me, her voice tight with panic, to say that my sister was storming past security, but before I could answer, the heavy glass door swung open. Bianca marched in looking like a walking advertisement for frantic denial. She was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and clutching a Birkin bag like a shield. She slammed the bag onto my desk, knocking over a stack of case files. The sound echoed in the quiet room, but I did not flinch. I just slowly looked up from my monitor and waited. "You need to stop this right now," Bianca hissed, removing her glasses to reveal eyes that were red-rimmed and puffy. "You are humiliating us, Zara." "Mrs. Higgins called me this morning asking if her investment is safe. Dr. Evans is asking questions. You are spreading poison about my husband because you are miserable and alone." I leaned back in my chair, looking at her with a mixture of pity and frustration. She was vibrating with nervous energy. It was the same energy I had seen in the wives of cartel bosses right before the DEA kicked down their doors. They knew something was wrong, but they were terrified to look at it directly, so they attacked the messenger instead. "Bianca, sit down," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. She remained standing, crossing her arms defensively. "I am not here to chat. I am here to tell you to back off. Hunter is a brilliant businessman. You do not understand how high finance works. You are just a bean counter, Zara. Stay in your lane." I stood up and walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. "I am trying to save you, Bianca. I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because your brilliant businessman has lost $15 million. He is running a Ponzi scheme. He is paying old investors with new money. And worst of all, he is using your friend's money to do it. When this crashes, and it will crash, you are going to be the one answering the phone calls from your friends, wondering where their life savings went." Bianca let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with a lifetime of practiced superiority. "Is that what this is about? You are trying to convince yourself he is a bad guy, so you do not have to face the truth. You are jealous, Zara. You have always been jealous. You wanted the house, you wanted the attention, and let us be honest, you wanted Hunter too. You cannot stand that he chose me. You cannot stand that I have the life you dream about while you sleep in an empty apartment with your cats." The accusation was so delusional it almost made me smile. She truly believed that her life of debt and deception was a prize to be coveted. She was so deep in the fog of her own vanity that she could not see the cliff she was standing on. I realized then that I could not save her. She did not want to be saved. She wanted to be right, even if it meant going down with the ship. "Get out of my office, Bianca," I said quietly, walking back to my chair. "Go home to your husband. Ask him to show you the bank statements for Apex Global. Ask him why he needs to sell grandfather estate so badly. But do not come back here and insult my intelligence." Bianca grabbed her bag, her knuckles white. "You are going to regret this," she spat. "Hunter is going to destroy you in court." She turned and stormed out, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume and desperation in her wake. I watched the door close and felt a heavy weight settle in my stomach. I had tried. I had given her a chance. Now I had to take down her husband, and unfortunately, she was going to be collateral damage. After Bianca slammed the door, I turned back to the glowing monitors. The silence in the room was heavy. I had the proof of the Ponzi scheme. I had the proof of the forged mortgages. But in forensic accounting, there is always one final layer: the exit strategy. Where was the money going? Hunter was bleeding cash, but he was also moving it. I traced the outgoing wire transfers from the Apex Global account in the Caymans. They were not going to vendors. They were not going to investors. They were bouncing back to the United States into a series of LLCs with vague names like PJ Holdings and Jenkins Management. PJ. Patricia Jenkins. My stomach dropped. I pulled up the bank records for these entities. They were opened 18 months ago. The signatory on the accounts was my mother, but the activity was textbook money laundering. Small deposits, $9,000 here, $8,000 there. Just enough to stay under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. It is called structuring, and it is a felony that carries a 10-year prison sentence. I clicked on the check images. There was my mother's signature again. But this time, it did not look forged. It looked shaky, but authentic. I could picture the scene perfectly. Hunter sitting at her kitchen table, charming her, smiling, telling her he needed help managing some family investments for tax purposes. He probably told her she was being a savvy businesswoman. "Just sign here, Mom. It is just for the accountant." And she, blinded by her adoration for him, signed her name to federal crimes over and over again. I sat back, covering my mouth with my hand. This changed everything. This was not just a civil dispute about a house anymore. This was a RICO case. Hunter had made my mother an accessory to money laundering. If I went to the FBI with this file today, they would arrest Hunter, but they would also arrest Patricia. She would be handcuffed. She would be fingerprinted. She would die in a federal prison cell because she was too proud to admit she had been conned. I looked at the face of the woman who had slapped me, the woman who had told me to leave. I held her life in my hands. I could push the button and destroy them all instantly. It would be justice. It would be the ultimate revenge for a lifetime of neglect. But as I looked at the evidence, I realized I did not want her in jail. I wanted her to suffer, but I did not want her behind bars. I wanted her to live with the knowledge of what she had done. I wanted her to wake up every morning in a small rented apartment knowing that the daughter she despised was the only reason she was not wearing an orange jumpsuit. I closed the file and encrypted it with a new password. The password was Mercy. I had the nuclear codes. Now I just had to decide when to launch the missile. I checked the time. The sun was coming up over Atlanta. The showdown was coming. They wanted a family dinner to force me to sign the deed. I would go, but I would not be bringing a pen. I would be bringing an indictment. While I was securely locking away the digital evidence of their financial crimes, Hunter was facing a deadline that could not be negotiated with a spreadsheet. My private investigator had managed to slip a listening device into the study of my parents' house just hours before. The audio feed that played through my headphones was a chilling portrait of a man on the edge of a violent collapse. The phone call came in at 3 a.m. It was not a bank. It was the Vegas syndicate. The voice on the other end was calm, which made it terrifying. "You have 48 hours, Hunter," the man said. "If we do not see $5 million in the account, we are going to start sending collectors to your wife is Pilates class, and they do not carry briefcases." Hunter slammed the phone down, and I could hear the sound of glass shattering. He was cornered. The $15 million hole in his ledger was no longer just a financial problem. It was a mortality problem. He needed the deed to the Oak Bluffs estate, and he needed it yesterday. Desperation is the mother of invention, but in Hunter's case, it was the mother of felony fraud. He sat at my grandfather's old mahogany desk, the same desk he had desecrated with his arrogance, and began to type. He was creating a codicil, a legal amendment to a will that supposedly superseded all previous documents. He backdated it 3 years. He used legal jargon he had Googled. The document claimed that my grandfather had realized I was unfit to manage the estate and had transferred all rights to Bianca and her husband. He marched into the sunroom where my mother and Bianca were sitting in a terrified silence, waiting for him to fix the mess he had created. He threw the fresh printout onto the coffee table. "Look what I found!" he lied, his voice manic and high-pitched. It was stuck between the file folders in the safe. "Otis wrote this. He knew Zara was trouble. This proves everything." My mother looked at the paper. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to believe it so badly. She wanted to believe that her father had not betrayed her by leaving control to me. She ignored the fact that the paper was bright white and crisp, unlike the yellowed documents from the actual file. She ignored the fact that the signature looked like a clumsy tracing. Hunter leaned over them, casting a long shadow. "We just need to witness it," he said, handing them a pen. "We need to sign that we saw this document. It is just a formality." Bianca hesitated. She looked at Hunter, wild eyes, and then at the paper. She knew it was a lie. I could hear her breathing fast on the audio feed. But fear is a powerful motivator. "Sign it," Hunter roared, slamming his hand on the table. "Do you want to be homeless? Do you want Zara to win?" My mother snatched the pen and signed. Then Bianca followed. In that moment, they crossed the line from bystanders to co-conspirators. They thought they were signing a solution. They were signing their own arrest warrants. The courier arrived at my penthouse door at 10 in the morning. He was a bored-looking man in a brown uniform, chewing gum and holding an electronic pad. He had no idea he was delivering a federal crime in a cardboard envelope. I signed for the package, my signature sharp and practiced on the screen. The return address was from the law offices representing Hunter, but the postmark was local. They had rushed this. They were panicking. I walked back to my desk and slit the envelope open with a letter opener. Inside was a single document clipped to a cover letter that reeked of faux legalese. It was titled, "Codicil to the Last Will and Testament of Otis Jenkins." A codicil is a document that amends an existing will. It is the oldest trick in the book for disgruntled relatives who feel shortchanged. I pulled it out and laid it flat on my desk, smoothing out the creases. The date at the top was from 3 years ago. The text claimed that this document was found in a personal safe that only Hunter and Bianca had access to. I began to read, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. My grandfather Otis was a man of few words. He spoke in grunts, nods, and short, practical sentences. He was a businessman who valued brevity. But the man who wrote this document sounded like a bad romance novelist. "To my dearest Bianca," the document read, "you have always been the light of this family. Your grace and beauty remind me of your grandmother every day." I realized that the heavy burden of the estate is too much for Zara, who has always been distant and cold. Therefore, I am revoking my previous will. I leave the Martha Vineyard estate and all liquid assets to Bianca and her husband Hunter, who have shown me nothing but love and support. I do this because I trust them to carry on the family legacy with the style it deserves. I stared at the words, "Style it deserves." My grandfather wore the same pair of work boots for 20 years. He drove a 10-year-old truck. He hated style. He hated ostentatious displays of wealth. He called people who flaunted money peacocks. The idea that he would leave his life work to Hunter, a man he privately referred to as the empty suit because of his style, was ludicrous. But the emotional manipulation was not the most important part. The most important part was the legal implication. By sending this document through a commercial carrier across state lines, they had just committed mail fraud. They were trying to use a forged instrument to seize assets valued over $1 million. This was not a family dispute anymore. This was a felony. I picked up the envelope and looked at the tracking number. I logged it into my evidence file. They were trying to bait me. They expected me to call them screaming. They expected me to hire a lawyer and fight the validity of the signature in a long, drawn-out civil battle. That is what a normal person would do. But I was not a normal person. I was a hunter who had just watched the prey walk directly into the cage. I did not call them. I did not scream. I simply picked up the phone and dialed my assistant. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow," I said, my eyes never leaving the forged signature of my dead grandfather. "I have a family dinner to attend, and I need you to book a flight for Special Agent Miller from the FBI field office. Tell him the package has been delivered." I placed the forged document under the high-intensity lamp of my digital microscope. The paper was bright white crisp and smooth to the touch. It felt wrong. My grandfather was a creature of habit. He bought his stationery from a local supply store in Oak Bluffs that had closed down 5 years ago. He used heavy cream-colored bond paper with a distinct watermark. This paper felt like it came from a bulk pack you buy at an office superstore. I adjusted the magnification to 50 times and focused on the fibers. Then I switched on the UV light. The paper glowed with a brilliant blue fluorescence. Optical brighteners. These are chemicals added to modern paper to make it appear whiter. But here is the catch. The specific chemical compound that created this particular shade of blue luminescence was a proprietary formula developed by a major paper manufacturer in 2023. My grandfather died in 2021. I sat back, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. They had printed a document supposedly signed 3 years ago on paper that did not even exist until last year. It was a rookie mistake, an arrogant mistake. Hunter thought he was smart because he knew how to move money in the shadows, but he forgot that the physical world leaves traces that digital manipulation cannot erase. I took a high-resolution photo of the fibers under the UV light. Then I moved the lens to the signature. Otis Jenkins. It looked like his handwriting. The slant was right. The pressure was consistent. Too consistent. Human beings are not robots. We have tremors. We have variations in speed. When we sign our name twice, it is never exactly the same, down to the micron. I pulled up the digital scan of my grandfather's real signature from his driver license. I overlaid it onto the live feed from the microscope. It was a perfect match. A 100% pixel-for-pixel match. That is impossible in nature. The only way to achieve that is to scan a signature and print it, or to trace it using a light box. Hunter had traced it. I could even see the microscopic hesitation marks where the pen had paused while he adjusted the paper. He had not just forged a document. He had created a forensic roadmap to his own guilt. He was so desperate to seize the estate that he had gotten sloppy. He thought no one would look this closely. He thought I was just a bitter granddaughter who would give up when faced with a legal document. He did not know he was handing a loaded gun to a sharpshooter. I saved the images to the evidence file. I had him on mail fraud. I had him on forgery. I had him on money laundering. And now I had him on fabricating evidence. The trap was set. All I had to do was walk into that dinner and let him spring it on himself. I picked up my phone and texted my contact at the FBI. It is confirmed. The paper is fake. We are a go for tomorrow night. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, channeling the version of myself my family preferred. The weak one. The obedient one. The one who crumbled under pressure. I picked up my phone and dialed Hunter number. My hands were steady, but I forced a tremor into my voice. I needed him to hear fear. I needed him to hear submission. If he suspected even for a second that I was in control, he would run. He answered on the second ring with the clipped tone of a man who thought he was too important to be bothered. Yeah. No hello, no greeting, just the arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him its attention. Hunter, it is Zara. I paused, letting a shaky breath escape into the microphone, intentionally making it sound jagged and wet. I got the package. I read the codicil. I did not know grandfather wrote that. There was a silence on the other end, a heavy, pregnant pause while he assessed my tone. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating whether my defeat was genuine. I continued pitching my voice slightly higher, making it sound thin and strained. If he really wanted you to have the house, I do not want to fight his wishes. I am tired, Hunter. I cannot afford a lawyer to fight this against the estate. You win. I heard a sharp exhale on the other end, the sound of tension leaving his body. The relief in his voice was immediate and palpable, masked quickly by his usual condescension. I am glad you finally decided to be reasonable, Zara. We tried to tell you this was for the best. We did not want to hurt you, but you gave us no choice. It is better for everyone if the assets are managed by people who understand finance. When can you sign? Tonight, I whispered. I just want this over with. I will come to the house for dinner. I will sign the release forms and the deed transfer. Just, please, promise me you will not sue me for the elder abuse claims. I just want to walk away and go back to my life. I let my voice crack on the last word, adding the perfect touch of desperation. Hunter let out a short, satisfied chuckle. The sound made my skin crawl. We can discuss the terms tonight, he said, granting a vague mercy that cost him nothing. 7 o'clock. Do not be late. And Zara, try to look presentable. We might pop some champagne to celebrate the family coming back together. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and the trembling in my hands vanished instantly. The fear evaporated from my face, replaced by a cold, predatory smile. He thought he was inviting a defeated victim to his victory lap. He thought he was about to sign the deal of a lifetime. He had no idea he had just invited the executioner to his last meal. I looked at the FBI agent sitting across from me who had been listening on speakerphone. He nodded once. The trap was set. Hunter was going to pop champagne tonight, but I was going to be the one serving the hangover. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, fastening the buttons of my charcoal gray blazer. It was not just a piece of clothing. It was a tactical decision. The fabric was thick enough to conceal the small black digital recorder taped to the inside of my lapel. I adjusted the wire running down my side, ensuring the microphone was positioned perfectly to capture every lie, every threat, and every confession that was about to be spoken. Tonight was not a family reunion. It was a sting operation. I checked my reflection one last time. The woman staring back at me was not the submissive daughter they expected. She was not the sister who could be bullied into silence. She was the trustee of the Jenkins estate, and she was about to bring the gavel down. I grabbed my leather portfolio, which contained nothing but blank paper and a single hidden camera lens embedded in the clasp. I walked into the living room where two men were waiting. Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer who had served my grandfather for 40 years, sat on the sofa looking grave. He was an older man with silver hair and a moral compass that pointed true north. He had been sickened by Hunter's attempts to manipulate him, and he had readily agreed to help me execute grandfather's final wishes. Standing next to him was a man I had only met yesterday, but who was now the most important person in the room, Special Agent Miller. He did not look like a federal agent. He looked like a nervous, overworked paralegal, which was exactly the point. He wore an ill-fitting brown suit and carried a stack of disorganized files. He had messy hair and thick glasses that magnified his eyes, making him look harmless. It was a perfect disguise. Tonight, his name was Thomas, and his job was to look incompetent while he memorized every face and every crime in that dining room. "Are we ready, Zara?" Mr. Henderson asked, standing up and smoothing his tie. He looked at me with a mixture of pride and sadness. "Your grandfather would have hated that it came to this. He built this family to be strong, not to cannibalize itself." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "He would have hated the greed," I said softly. "But he would have loved the justice. Let us go." We took the elevator down to the garage in silence. The drive to my parents' house in Buckhead was a journey through memories I was about to incinerate. I remembered learning to ride a bike in that driveway. I remembered hiding in the treehouse to escape my mother's criticism. Tonight, I was returning not as a child seeking approval, but as a prosecutor seeking a verdict. As we pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the estate, I saw the lights blazing from every window. They had staged the house to look welcoming. It was a theater set, designed to lull me into a false sense of security. Hunter's leased luxury sedan was parked in the front, a gleaming symbol of money he did not have. I parked my sensible car next to it. The engine ticked as it cooled in the humid night air. I turned to Agent Miller in the back seat. "Remember," I said, my voice steady, "do not intervene until I give the signal. I need them to say it. I need them to admit to the forgery and the intent to sell on tape. If we move too early, they can claim it was a misunderstanding. I need a confession." He nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Just get them talking. We will handle the rest." I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door flanked by my team. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the final act. I reached out and rang the doorbell. It echoed deep inside the house. I took a deep breath and put on the mask of the defeated sister. Showtime. The dining room was staged like a set for a play about a happy family. The crystal chandelier cast a warm, golden light over the table, which was set with the good china that my mother usually reserved for Christmas. In the center of the table, right next to a floral arrangement of white lilies, sat the stack of legal documents. They were not subtle. They were the main course. Beside them lay a heavy black Mont Blanc pen, uncapped and waiting like a weapon loaded and aimed at my chest. Hunter stood at the head of the table, holding a bottle of Dom Perignon like a scepter. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket that looked ridiculous, but in his mind probably signaled refined leisure. He looked at me as I entered, his eyes gleaming with the intoxicant of victory. He did not offer to take my coat. He simply gestured to the empty chair on the side of the table, the spot usually reserved for children or guests of lower status. "Come in, Zara," he boomed, his voice too loud for the room. "You look terrible, but I suppose losing a battle takes it out of you. Sit down. Let us get some bubbles in you." He poured the champagne into the flutes, the foam spilling over the rim onto the tablecloth. He did not care. In his mind, he was about to own the tablecloth, the table, and the house it sat in. My mother was sitting to his right, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked pale. When I sat down, she could not meet my eyes. She stared fixedly at the documents, as if willing them to be signed by telekinesis, so the tension would dissipate. Bianca sat opposite her, looking bored, scrolling through her phone, probably deleting the angry messages from her friends who had lost their money. I motioned for Mr. Henderson and the undercover agent Thomas to stand near the sideboard. Hunter sneered at them. "Who is the disheveled one?" he asked, pointing his glass at Agent Miller. "He looks like he slept in his car." "That is my legal assistant, Thomas," I said, keeping my voice low and defeated. "He is just here to witness the signature and notarize the transfer. He needs to verify the identity of all signatories. It is standard procedure." Hunter laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Standard procedure? You are still trying to play bureaucrat, even when you are surrendering." "Fine. Let him watch. The help can stand in the corner." He took a long swallow of champagne and leaned back, crossing his legs. He looked at me with a pity that felt like a physical slap. "You know, Zara, we really did not want to do this the hard way. If you had just accepted your place, none of this unpleasantness would have been necessary. Grandfather knew you were not built for the pressure of managing wealth. You are a worker bee, not a queen. We are doing you a favor by taking this burden away." I looked at the documents. The top page was the forged codicil. The paper was bright white under the chandelier light, screaming its falseness to anyone who knew where to look. I reached out and touched the edge of the paper, my hand trembling slightly for effect. "You are right, Hunter," I said softly. "I just want it to be over." My mother let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since I walked in. "Just sign it, Zara," she whispered. "Then we can eat. We have roast lamb, your favorite." It was a grotesque offer. She was trading my inheritance for a plate of meat. She wanted to buy my silence with dinner. I looked up at Hunter, who was pushing the pen toward me across the mahogany surface. The trap was open. All I had to do was stick my hand in. But he did not know that the trap was not for me. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen, but I did not bring it to the paper. I let my hand hover, trembling slightly, as if the weight of the decision was too much to bear. I looked across the table at my mother. I needed her to say it. I needed the jury to understand exactly who she was. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "do you really believe this is what Grandfather wanted? Do you really believe I am unfit?" My mother slammed her fork down onto her china plate. The sharp clang made everyone jump, except me. She looked at me with eyes devoid of maternal warmth. She looked at me like I was a stain on her perfect tablecloth. "Why must you always make everything difficult, Zara? You were born difficult. You are not just stubborn, you are a disappointment, a stain on this family name. Your father died worrying about you. He knew you were too weak to carry his legacy. Do not prove him right. Sign the paper and disappear like you always do." I let those words hit me. They were designed to break my heart, but instead, they hardened my resolve. She had just verbally abused the trustee of the estate in front of witnesses. I looked down at the table, hiding the cold satisfaction in my eyes. "I am sorry, Mom," I said softly. "I never wanted to disappoint you." I turned my gaze to Hunter. He was watching the exchange with a smirk, enjoying the spectacle of my humiliation. I shifted the pen in my hand. I had one final question. The question that would seal his fate. "Hunter," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "I need to know one thing before I sign. Once I execute this transfer and sign the codicil, you have full control, right? You are the sole owner of the Martha Vineyard estate." "Absolutely," he said, leaning forward, his eyes greedy. "Total and complete control. It is all in the paperwork, and you are going to keep it in the family, right?" I asked, widening my eyes innocently. "You are going to preserve grandfather's legacy, like you said at the funeral." Hunter laughed a cruel, dismissive sound. He took a sip of his champagne and shook his head. "Oh, grow up, Zara. Legacy does not pay the bills. I already have a buyer lined up. The developers are bulldozing that old shack next week. We are cashing out. $25 million. That house is a money pit. I am turning it into liquid capital by Monday morning." There it was, the confession. He had just admitted to fraud and intent to liquidate assets he did not legally own. I felt the vibration of the recorder against my chest. It was done. I slowly capped the pen and placed it back on the table with a deliberate click. "What are you doing?" Hunter asked, his smile faltering. "Sign the paper." "No," I said, my voice suddenly steady and strong. "I do not think I will." "What did you say?" my mother asked, her voice rising in panic. "I said no," I repeated, standing up and smoothing my blazer. "And Hunter, you might want to put that glass down. It is hard to be handcuffed when you are holding a drink." The room went completely still. It was the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster, where the air pressure drops and the birds stop singing. The only sound was the low, indifferent drone of the air conditioner and the shallow, rapid breathing of my mother sitting across from me. I looked down at the Mont Blanc pen in my hand. It was heavy, cold, and sleek. To them, it was just a writing instrument. To me, it was the key to my own prison. If I signed my name, I would be buying my freedom from their abuse, but I would be selling my soul. I would be validating their lies. I would be agreeing that I was the weak, incompetent daughter they had always claimed I was. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room burning into my skin. My mother was leaning forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were wide and pleading, silently begging me to just do this one thing to save her world from collapsing. Bianca had stopped looking at her phone. She was watching the tip of the pen. Her lips parted in anticipation, already mentally spending the money she thought was seconds away from being hers. And Hunter was practically vibrating. He looked like a wolf watching a lamb walk into the slaughterhouse. His greed was so potent I could almost smell it, mixed with his expensive cologne and the metallic scent of the fear he was hiding. I lowered the pen toward the paper. The tip hovered millimeters above the signature line. I saw Hunter's shoulders drop a fraction of an inch in relief. He thought he had won. He thought his intimidation tactics had worked. He thought the little tax clerk from Atlanta had finally broken. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I wanted them to feel the victory. I wanted them to taste it, because it would make the ash that was about to fill their mouths so much more bitter. Then I lifted my hand. I did not sign. I did not make a mark. I slowly, deliberately turned my wrist and let the heavy pen drop from my fingers. It hit the mahogany table with a loud, sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. It rolled across the polished wood, spinning on its axis, before coming to rest against the base of the crystal wine glass. "I am not signing," I said, my voice low but perfectly steady. "I am not signing this document. I am not signing the deed. And I am certainly not signing away my grandfather's legacy to a criminal." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. It was as if their brains could not process the information. The rejection was so absolute, so unexpected, that it caused a momentary short circuit in the room reality. Then the explosion came. Hunter's face turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. The vein in his forehead bulged as the blood rushed to his head. He did not just stand up. He erupted from his chair. He slammed his palms down onto the table with such force that the plates jumped and the silverware rattled against the china. The wine in the glasses sloshed over the rims, staining the white tablecloth like fresh blood. "Are you insane?" he roared, his voice cracking with rage. He leaned over the table, spitting the words at me, his composure completely shattered. "You stupid little bitch. Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are not walking out of here until that paper is signed. Who do you think you are to say no to me? I run this family. I make the decisions. You are nothing. You are a nobody with a calculator and a cat." "Pick up the pen." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I did not flinch at his volume. I did not recoil from his anger. His rage was terrifying to my mother, who cowered in her seat, covering her mouth with her hand. It was terrifying to Bianca, who looked between us with wide, panicked eyes. But to me, his rage was not power. It was weakness. It was the tantrum of a toddler who had been told no for the first time in his life. It was the desperation of a man who knows the walls are closing in. "Pick it up!" Hunter screamed again, grabbing a crystal goblet and hurling it against the wall. It shattered, sending shards of glass raining down onto the sideboard. "Pick it up and sign the damn paper, or I swear to God, I will break every finger in your hand until you do." I looked at him calmly, watching the spittle fly from his mouth. I watched him unravel. I watched the sophisticated financial genius dissolve into a violent thug. This was the real Hunter. This was the man my sister married. And this was exactly what the microphone taped to my chest needed to hear. He had just threatened physical violence to coerce a signature. He had just added assault and extortion to his growing list of felonies. "I am not afraid of you, Hunter," I said, my voice cutting through his shouting like a razor. "And I am not signing, because that document is a forgery, and that paper you printed it on did not exist when Grandfather died." The color drained from his face instantly, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He froze, his hands still pressed against the table, his chest heaving. The silence returned, but this time, it was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a grave. He knew. In that split second, he knew that I knew. And he knew it was over. The sound of Hunter breathing was the only thing audible in the dining room. A harsh, rasping noise like a machine that was overheating. He was still leaning over the table, his knuckles white against the mahogany, staring at me with a mixture of homicidal rage and dawning horror. He had just threatened to break my fingers. He had just shattered a glass, and I had just told him that his master plan was built on a lie. But before he could lunge across the table or scream another obscenity, a new voice cut through the tension. It was dry, calm, and carried the weight of 4 decades of legal practice. Mr. Vanderhoven, I strongly suggest you sit down before you add assault and battery to the very long list of crimes you have committed this evening. Mr. Henderson stepped out of the shadows near the sideboard. He walked to the table with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who has nothing to hide. He did not look at Hunter. He did not look at my mother. He placed his leather briefcase on the table, right on top of the wine stain, and clicked the brass latches open. The sound was sharp and final. Hunter blinked, momentarily confused by the intervention. "Who are you?" he snarled, though his voice had lost some of its thunder. "You are just the witness. Shut up and notarize the paper." "I am not here to notarize anything," Mr. Henderson said, pulling out a thick document bound in blue legal backing. He adjusted his spectacles and looked at Hunter with a gaze that was almost pitying. "I am the executor of the Otis Jenkins estate, and I am here to tell you that this entire charade, this dinner, this threat, and that pathetic forgery on the table is completely irrelevant." "What are you talking about?" My mother spoke up, her voice trembling. "It is a codicil. It amends the will. It leaves everything to us." Mr. Henderson turned to her. "Patricia, your father was a man of few words, but he was incredibly observant. He saw things you thought you hid. He saw the way you spent money you did not have. He saw the way Hunter looked at his property like a hungry wolf. And 5 years ago, long before he got sick, he came to my office with a very specific instruction. He said he wanted to ensure that his legacy could never be sold, leveraged, or stolen by greedy relatives." He slid the blue document across the table. It spun slowly until it stopped directly in front of Hunter. "You are fighting over a will," Mr. Henderson continued. "But a will only controls assets that belong to the deceased at the time of their death. But the Martha's Vineyard house, the investment accounts, and the land in Georgia do not belong to Otis Jenkins. They haven't belonged to him for 5 years." Hunter looked down at the document, his eyes scanning the cover page. I watched the blood drain from his face until he looked like a wax figure. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. On March 12, 2019, Otis Jenkins transferred every single significant asset he owned into the Jenkins Family Irrevocable Trust, Mr. Henderson announced, his voice ringing with authority. "Do you know what irrevocable means, Hunter? It means it cannot be changed. It cannot be amended. It cannot be undone by a codicil found in a safe. It is a locked steel vault. And once the assets are in the trust, they are no longer subject to probate." The room was spinning for them. I could see it in their eyes. They had spent months, maybe years, plotting to hijack the will. They had forged signatures. They had manipulated a grieving old man. And it was all for nothing. They were trying to rob a safe that had already been emptied. My mother looked like she had been slapped. He gave it away?" she whispered. He didn't trust us? No, Patricia, he did not, Mr. Henderson said brutally. He knew exactly what would happen when he died. He knew you would try to sell the land for quick cash. He knew Hunter would try to drain the accounts, so he removed the temptation. The owner of the estate is the trust, and the trust has only one trustee. One person with the sole legal authority to manage the assets. He pointed a finger at me. Zara is not just the executor of a will that you can contest in court. She is the trustee. She holds the keys. And under the terms of the trust, she has absolute discretion. She can ban you from the property. She can cut off your allowance. She can do whatever she deems necessary to protect the legacy. And you cannot sue her, you cannot fire her, and you certainly cannot bully her into signing it away, because the trust document explicitly states that any beneficiary who challenges the trustee is automatically disinherited. Hunter picked up the blue document. His hands were shaking so badly that the paper rattled. He flipped through the pages, desperately looking for a loophole, a mistake, anything to salvage his scheme. But there was nothing. My grandfather had outsmarted them from the grave. He had built a fortress around his life's work, and he had put me in the tower to guard it. So you see, Mr. Henderson said, closing his briefcase with a snap, you did not just forge a document, Hunter. You forged a document to steal something that does not exist. It is legally impossible for you to own that house. You have been playing a game of chess, but your opponent left the table 5 years ago. I watched Hunter. I watched the realization sink in. The debt collectors were coming for him in 48 hours. He needed that house to pay them. Without it, he was a dead man walking. He dropped the trust document onto the table. It landed next to his forgery. The truth and the lie, side by side. One was ironclad, the other was a one-way ticket to prison, and he knew it. The silence in the room was absolute, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Moments ago, the air had been thick with the threat of violence and the stench of extortion. Now it was heavy with the suffocating weight of realization. Hunter stared at the blue legal folder as if it were a radioactive isotope that had just poisoned his entire future. My mother looked between Mr. Henderson and me, her eyes darting back and forth, trying to process the sudden inversion of power. She was a woman who understood hierarchy, and she had just realized she was no longer at the top of it. I stood up slowly. I did not need to shout. I did not need to throw glass against the wall. Authority does not need to raise its voice. I walked around the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor, until I stood behind my mother's chair. I placed my hands on the back of it, not affectionately, but possessively. I think there is some confusion about the terminology, I said, my voice cool and precise. Let me clarify what Mr. Henderson just explained. You heard the word trust, and you assumed it meant a payout. You assumed it meant that grandfather secured the bag for you, so you could continue buying designer handbags and funding Hunter failed gambling addictions. I picked up the trust document and flipped to page 12. I smoothed the paper down. Grandfather loved you, Mom. And he loved you, Bianca. But he was not blind. He knew that if he gave you lump sums of cash, you would burn through it in a year. He knew that you attract predators. I glanced at Hunter, who was now slumped in his chair, looking like a man whose parachute had failed to open. So he created a structure to protect you from yourselves. I pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the page. You are listed as beneficiaries. That means you have the right to live in the house. You have the right to receive a monthly stipend for living expenses. You have the right to have your medical bills paid. You will never be homeless, and you will never go hungry. Grandfather ensured that. My mother let out a small, relieved sob. So nothing changes, she whispered. We are safe. I leaned in closer, my shadow falling over her plate. That depends entirely on your definition of safe, Mom. Because while you are the beneficiaries, I am the trustee, and in a discretionary trust, the trustee has absolute power. I walked over to Bianca, who was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. That means I decide how much the stipend is. I decide if a renovation is necessary or if it is just vanity. I decide if the trust pays for a new Mercedes or if a used Honda is sufficient for your needs. Every single dollar you ask for has to be approved by me. If you want to paint the walls, you ask me. If you want to go on vacation, you submit a request to me. From this moment forward, I am not just your daughter or your sister. I am your bank manager. I am your landlord, and I am your boss. Hunter finally spoke. His voice was a low growl. You cannot do that. That is insane. No court will uphold that. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Actually, courts uphold this every day. It is called a spendthrift trust. It is specifically designed to prevent beneficiaries from squandering assets. And Zara has a fiduciary duty to protect the principal. If she believes that giving you money will result in waste, she is legally obligated to cut you off. I smiled at Mr. Henderson and turned back to the table. But that is not even the best part. I flipped to the final section of the document. Grandfather added a special clause. It is colloquially known as a moral turpitude clause. I began to read aloud, my voice ringing clearly in the room. If any beneficiary engages in criminal activity, substance abuse, or behavior that brings public shame or disrepute to the Jenkins family name, the trustee shall have the immediate authority to suspend all distributions and access to trust assets until such time as the trustee deems the behavior corrected. I closed the folder with a soft thud. Do you understand what that means? It means the money is conditional. It is based on good behavior. And let us review your behavior tonight. I looked at Hunter. Forgery, attempted fraud, assault, verbal abuse, extortion. I looked at my mother and Bianca. Co-conspiracy to commit fraud, aiding and abetting, attempted theft of an estate. I paused, letting the reality sink in. Technically, under Section 9, Paragraph C of this document, I could evict you all tonight. I could cut off every cent. I could change the locks and leave you on the curb with nothing but the clothes on your backs. You have violated every single moral standard my grandfather set. You have dishonored his name in his own house. My mother, face crumpled. She looked old suddenly. The veneer of the high society matriarch cracked and fell away, revealing a terrified elderly woman who realized she had bitten the hand that feeds her. Zara, please, she stammered, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. We did not know. Hunter told us it was legal. We were just trying to keep the family together. I stepped back out of her reach. Ignorance is not a defense, Mom. You knew he was forging that signature. You watched him do it. You chose greed over integrity, and now you have to live with the consequences. I looked at Bianca. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. She looked at Hunter with a mix of hatred and fear. She realized that her golden goose was cooked. "I am not going to evict you tonight," I said, my voice cold. "Because unlike you, I actually care about this family reputation. But things are going to change. Hunter, you are not a beneficiary. You have no rights to this house or this money. And considering the clause I just read, I cannot allow trust assets to support a criminal." I checked my watch. "It is 8 o'clock. I suggest you enjoy the roast lamb, because tomorrow morning, I am freezing the discretionary accounts. The party is over. The open bar is closed. Welcome to the real world." The reality of my declaration hit the room like a physical shockwave. For a few seconds, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, the dam broke. Bianca was the first to shatter. The realization that her credit cards, her vacations, and her social standing were now subject to the approval of the sister she had bullied for decades was too much for her fragile ego to process. She let out a sound that was less like a scream and more like the shriek of a banshee. She stood up so abruptly that her chair toppled backward, crashing onto the hardwood floor. "You cannot do this!" she screamed, her face contorted into a mask of ugly weeping. "You are stealing my life! You are stealing everything from me! I have a baby, Zara! How dare you! You are going to make us destitute just to prove a point. You are a monster!" She grabbed the nearest object, which happened to be a crystal water pitcher, and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the far wall, sending shards of glass and water spraying over the expensive silk wallpaper. I did not flinch. I watched her tantrum with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. She was not crying for her child. She was crying for the loss of her status. She was grieving the death of her arrogance. Then came the second act of the tragedy. My mother, who realized that screaming would not work on me, decided to play her greatest hit, the victim card. She gasped loudly, clutching her chest with both hands as if she had been shot. "Oh, my heart!" she wailed, her voice trembling with theatrical vibrato. "The stress! You are killing me, Zara! You are literally killing your own mother!" She swayed on her feet, looking around for a soft place to land. I watched her eyes dart to the rug before she let her knees buckle. She collapsed slowly, ensuring that she did not hit her head on the table leg. It was a performance she had perfected over years of manipulating my father. She lay on the Persian rug panting, eyes fluttering closed, waiting for me to rush to her side and promise her anything just to make her wake up. I stayed seated. "Call 911, I said to Mr. Henderson, my voice bored. "If she is having a heart attack, she needs a hospital. If she is faking it, the paramedics will bill her for the ambulance ride, and since her account is frozen, she will have to pay cash." At the mention of the bill, my mother's eyes snapped open. She did not stand up, but the panting stopped. She glared at me from the floor, her ruse exposed. But Hunter was not screaming, and he was not acting. He was standing at the end of the table, vibrating with a dark, lethal energy. He was not looking at the trust document anymore. He was looking at me. He realized that the debt collectors were 48 hours away, and his only lifeline had just been severed. He was a cornered animal, and in that moment, the veneer of the civilized businessman vanished completely. "You think you are so smart," he hissed, his voice low and guttural. "You think you can walk into my house and take everything. You think a piece of paper is going to stop me." He did not walk toward me. He lunged. He moved with the jagged speed of a man who sees his own coffin and decides to take everyone else with him. He grabbed a steak knife from the table, the silver blade gleaming under the chandelier light. His eyes were dead. There was no humanity left in them, just pure reptilian instinct. "I will kill you," he roared, closing the distance between us in 2 strides. "I will kill you before I let you ruin me." I did not move. I did not have to. Before Hunter could take his 3rd step, the man he had mocked as a disheveled assistant was in motion. Special Agent Miller moved faster than I could track. One moment, he was standing by the sideboard holding a file. The next, he was a blur of brown worsted wool. He intercepted Hunter mid-lunge. Miller stepped into Hunter's space, grabbing the wrist that held the knife and twisting it violently. There was a sickening crunch as the bone snapped. Hunter screamed a high-pitched sound of agony and dropped the knife. Miller did not stop. He swept Hunter legs out from under him and slammed him face first onto the dining table. The china shattered. The roast lamb slid onto the floor. Hunter's face was pressed into the white tablecloth, which was now soaking up the spilled wine and the sweat of a desperate criminal. Miller twisted Hunter's arm behind his back, pinning him down with effortless precision. "Federal agent," he shouted, his voice commanding the chaos. "Drop the weapon! Do not move!" Hunter writhed on the table, spitting blood and curses, but Miller pressed his thumb into a pressure point on Hunter's neck, forcing him to go limp. The transformation was absolute. The arrogant master of the universe was now just a broken man, pinned to a table amidst the ruins of his own dinner party. I stood up slowly and picked up the steak knife from the floor, using a napkin to preserve the fingerprints. I placed it on the table next to Hunter's head. "Assault with a deadly weapon," I said, looking down at him. "Add that to the list, Agent Miller." Bianca was sobbing in the corner, terrified into silence. My mother was sitting up on the rug, staring at her son-in-law in horror. The illusion of their perfect life had not just cracked, it had exploded, and I was the only one left standing in the wreckage. Agent Miller pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt and clicked them onto Hunter's wrists behind his back. The sound was mechanical and final. Hunter was no longer struggling. He went limp, his cheek pressed against the wine-stained tablecloth, his eyes wide and unseeing. He was in shock, not just from the pain of his broken wrist, but from the sudden collapse of his reality. I stepped forward and picked up the trust document from the table. I smoothed the cover, looking at my mother and sister who were huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. They were waiting for me to fix it. They were waiting for me to tell the nice police officer it was all a misunderstanding, so we could go back to pretending everything was fine. They still did not understand that the Zara who fixed things was gone. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "As of this moment, I am invoking my emergency powers under Article 4 of the Trust Agreement. Due to the clear evidence of criminal mismanagement and attempted fraud, I am initiating a complete and total asset freeze." Bianca looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "What does that mean?" she whimpered. "It means the party is over, Bianca." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. I just sent the authorization code to the bank. "Your credit cards are declined. All of them. The platinum card, the black card, the emergency card. They are all plastic scrap now." I turned to my mother. "The joint checking account you share with Hunter is locked. The savings account is frozen. You cannot withdraw cash. You cannot write checks. You cannot transfer funds. Until my team completes a forensic audit of every single penny that has moved through this family in the last 5 years, not a dime leaves the estate without my personal signature. Hunter let out a low moan from the table. It was the sound of a man realizing he was already dead. He tried to lift his head, but Miller pushed him back down. I leaned in close to Hunter's ear. I know about the Vegas syndicate, Hunter. I know about the $5 million you owe them. I know they gave you 48 hours. Hunter's body went rigid. His eyes darted to mine, filled with a terror that transcended the fear of prison. He knew what happened to people who stiffed the cartel. He knew that prison was actually the safest place for him right now. But he also knew that debts like his have a way of following people inside. You were counting on selling the Martha Vineyard house to pay them off, I continued, my voice a whisper that only he could hear. You were going to strip my mother of her safety and my sister of her future just to save your own skin. Well, that option is gone. The house belongs to the trust. The money belongs to the trust. And you, Hunter, own nothing. I stood up straight and addressed the room one last time. Agent Miller is going to take you into custody now, Hunter. You are going to be charged with fraud, forgery, assault, and money laundering. And Mom, Bianca, I suggest you start looking for jobs, because the allowance stops today. I am not funding your lifestyle anymore. I am using the money to pay the lawyers who are going to put Hunter in prison. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. I did not look back at the shattered glass or the ruined dinner. I walked out into the night air, which tasted sweet and clean. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the private security firm. I need a team at the Jenkins estate immediately, I said. Secure the perimeter, change the locks, and make sure nobody leaves with anything valuable. I hung up and got into my car. The war was over. I had dropped the bomb. Now I just had to watch the fallout. Hunter was still writhing against the restraints, screaming about his rights and demanding to call his lawyer. But I was not finished. I walked back to the table where the chaos had begun and picked up the single sheet of paper that had started this entire war. The codicil. The document they had bet their lives on. I held it up so the light from the chandelier shone through it, illuminating the fibers. To the naked eye, it looked like a standard legal document, but to me, it looked like a confession. You keep shouting about your rights, Hunter, I said, my voice cutting through his panicked rambling. You seem to think this is a civil matter. You think this is just a disagreement about who gets the house. You are wrong. This is a federal crime scene. I tossed the paper onto the table in front of my mother. It landed with a soft slide, coming to rest next to the broken glass. Look at it, Mom, I commanded. Really look at it. Hunter told you he found this in Grandfather's safe. He told you it was signed 3 years ago. He lied. Hunter stopped struggling. He went completely still, his eyes locked on the paper. I ran a forensic analysis on this document yesterday, I continued, my voice clinical and cold. Paper manufacturing is a science. Every batch has a chemical fingerprint. This specific brand of high-brightness bond paper uses an optical brightener called Benetex OB+. It creates that crisp blue-white hue you see under the light. It is very impressive. I leaned down, getting into Hunter's face. The only problem is that the manufacturer did not start using that chemical formula until 2023. Grandfather died in 2021. Do you understand the math, Hunter? You printed a document on paper that did not exist when the person who supposedly signed it was alive. You literally tried to rewrite history on a piece of stationery that is from the future. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. She looked at the paper as if it were a snake. She realized finally just how clumsy the deception was. She realized she had been led off a cliff by a man who was not even smart enough to buy vintage paper. And because you sent this document to me via a commercial courier across state lines, I added, straightening up, you committed mail fraud because you tried to use it to transfer assets worth over $1 million. You committed wire fraud. These are not misdemeanors. These are felonies. Each count carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. I looked at Bianca, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. You wanted to play the victim, Bianca. You wanted to believe your husband was a financial genius. Well, here is his genius. He forged a federal document, and he did it so badly that a first-year accounting student could have caught him. He did not just steal, he insulted my intelligence. I nodded to Agent Miller. Take the evidence, Agent, and take the trash out. Miller grabbed the document and slid it into an evidence bag. He hauled Hunter to his feet. Hunter looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left, no smirk, just the hollow, terrifying realization that he had played a game against a grandmaster, and he had lost everything. As they dragged him out the front door, the only sound left in the room was the soft weeping of two women who had just realized they were accomplices to a crime they did not even understand. Agent Miller paused at the door, holding Hunter by his broken arm, but I signaled him to wait. We were not done. The forgery was just the appetizer. I walked back to my leather portfolio and pulled out the second file. It was black, heavy, and thick with the weight of ruined lives. I tossed it onto the table with a force that made the china rattle. It slid across the polished wood and hit the centerpiece, knocking a few white petals off the lilies. This is the Cayman Islands dossier, I announced, my voice echoing in the silent room. You thought this was just about a house. You thought this was a simple family dispute about who gets to live in the mansion. You were wrong. This is a $15 million Ponzi scheme. I walked over to the table and flipped the file open, revealing rows of complex wire transfers and offshore account numbers. I pointed to a highlighted column. Apex Global. That is the shell company your husband set up, Bianca. He has been taking money from new investors and using it to pay off the old ones. But mostly, he has been using it to pay for his lifestyle. The cars, the watches, the trips to St. Bart's. It was all stolen money. He stole from Mrs. Higgins. He stole from Dr. Evans. He stole from half the people who were sitting in the pews at the funeral yesterday. He didn't just bankrupt himself. He bankrupted your entire social circle. Bianca let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth with her hands as she looked at her husband with horror. Hunter did not deny it. He just stared at the floor, his face gray and sweaty. But that is not even the worst part, I continued, turning my gaze to my mother. The worst part isn't the theft. It is the vehicle he used to hide it. I flipped to the next section of the file. It contained copies of incorporation papers and bank signature cards. I smoothed them out on the table directly in front of my mother. Look at the name on these accounts, Mom. PJ Holdings, Jenkins Management. Those are not Hunter companies. They are yours. My mother stared at the papers, blinking rapidly. I don't understand, she stammered. He told me those were for tax purposes. He said he was helping me manage the estate. I just signed where he told me to sign. Exactly, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You signed. You signed your name to federal money laundering documents. He didn't just steal from you, Mom. He stole through you. He used your clean credit and your good name to wash his dirty money. He turned the matriarch of the Jenkins family into a money mule for a criminal enterprise. I leaned down, getting eye level with her. Do you know what the penalty is for structuring and money laundering? It is 10 to 20 years in federal prison. In the eyes of the law, you are not a victim. You are a co-conspirator. You are his partner in crime. The only reason Agent Miller is not putting handcuffs on you right now is because I intervened. I showed them the medical records. I argued that you were elderly and incompetent. I had to tell the FBI that my mother is too senile to understand what she was signing just to keep you out of a jail cell. My mother looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Her pride was gone. Her arrogance was shattered. She realized that the daughter she had slapped and scorned was the only shield standing between her and a prison sentence. Hunter used you as a human shield, I said, straightening up. He knew that if he got caught, the trail would lead back to you. He was willing to let you die in prison to save himself. That is the man you chose over me. That is the man you let slap me. I hope he was worth it, because he just cost you your dignity, your fortune, and almost your freedom. Agent Miller, take him away. I am done looking at him. The man they had dismissed as a clumsy legal assistant named Thomas straightened his tie. He reached into the inner pocket of his ill-fitting suit jacket, but he did not pull out a pen or a notary seal. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open with a practiced snap. The gold shield caught the light of the crystal chandelier, gleaming with a terrifying authority. It was the only clean thing in a room filled with dirty secrets. I am not a paralegal, Mrs. Jenkins, he said, his voice stripping away the stutter and the nervousness he had faked all evening. I am Special Agent Thomas Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crimes Division. He raised his left hand to his ear, pressing a small button on a hidden earpiece. The time for theater was over. Target is secured, he said into the comms, his eyes never leaving Hunter. We have the physical evidence. Move in, go for breach. The illusion of domestic privacy shattered instantly. The heavy oak front doors of the estate did not just open. They were thrown wide with a force that shook the walls. The sound of heavy tactical boots thundering on the marble floors drowned out the soft classical music that was still playing in the background. It was a violent intrusion of reality into their fantasy world. A dozen agents in blue windbreakers emblazoned with those 3 terrifying yellow letters swarmed into the foyer. FBI. They poured into the dining room, moving with military precision. It was overkill for a dinner party, but appropriate for a man who owed $5 million to a violent cartel. 2 uniformed officers marched up to Hunter, taking custody from Agent Miller. They checked the cuffs, tightening them until Hunter winced, his face pressed against the tablecloth that was now stained with wine and defeat. Hunter Vanderhoven, Agent Miller announced, reciting the Liturgy of the Damned. You are under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Hunter tried to twist around to look at his wife, his face pale and slick with sweat. Bianca, call the firm, he screamed, his voice cracking. Call the senator. Tell them who I am. Tell them this is a mistake. Bianca did not move. She was frozen in her chair, watching the man she thought was a king being handled like a common street criminal. She watched as the agents patted him down, pulling his phone, his alligator skin wallet, and the keys to the leased Bentley out of his pockets. They dropped his possessions into clear plastic evidence bags. The clatter of his luxury life hitting the bottom of a plastic sack was the final insult. "Get him out of here," Miller ordered. They hauled him up. He could not walk straight. His legs were jelly. As they dragged him past me, he did not look at me with anger anymore. He looked at me with begging eyes. He knew I was the only one who understood the math. He knew I was the only one who could maybe, possibly, pay off the debts that were waiting for him. But I just stood there, my face impassive. I watched him disappear into the hallway flanked by federal agents. The front door opened, and the flashing blue and red lights from the driveway washed over the dining room, painting my mother's terrified face in the strobe light of an emergency. The king was dead. The castle had fallen. And I was the only one left holding the keys. Hunter's screams faded as the heavy oak door slammed shut, leaving only the manic wail of sirens tearing through the quiet night air of the Buckhead estate. "Bianca, call the lawyer. Do not just stand there. Do something." His final desperate plea echoed off the stone facade, pitiful and raw, before he was shoved into the back of the squad car like expired merchandise. Bianca snapped out of her trance. She bolted toward the door, her high heels skidding on the puddle of red wine that had pooled on the hardwood floor, looking disturbingly like blood. She ran down the front steps, stumbling as her expensive designer gown tangled around her legs. "Wait! You cannot take my husband! Do you have any idea who he is? This is a mistake!" A female FBI agent stepped into her path, blocking her with the impassive solidity of a riot wall. She did not use force. She simply raised a hand, her eyes sharp and professional. "Step back, ma'am. Do not interfere with a federal arrest unless you want to be handcuffed and put in the car with him." Bianca froze, her chest heaving violently. She spun around, her hands shaking as she dug her latest model iPhone out of her Hermes clutch. "I will sue you. I will call the family firm. I will hire the best lawyers in the city and bury you people." She mumbled like a madwoman, her thumb stabbing at the touchscreen to bypass the Face ID. I stood, leaning against the doorframe, my arms crossed, watching the curtain fall on her performance. I knew exactly what she was about to do, and I knew exactly what she was about to see. Bianca opened her private banking app. The loading circle spun for a second before revealing the result. Her face went from flushed red to a sickly sheet white. Her lips trembled, moving silently as she tried to comprehend the numbers. "Impossible," she wheezed, her finger swiping down frantically to refresh the page in a hopeless loop. "It is a glitch. The network is down. Why are the numbers red?" She frantically switched to her American Express Platinum app. A bright notification popped up blindingly on the screen. "Account suspended by trustee administrator. Please contact your financial institution." She tried a quick transfer from her personal savings to her digital wallet. Transaction declined. Available balance 0.00. The phone slipped from her sweat-slicked fingers and hit the marble steps with a sharp crack. The screen shattered, spiderwebbing across the glass, mirroring the fracture of her entire superficial existence. She turned slowly toward me, her eyes wide with a primal terror. It was not the grief of a wife losing her husband. It was the sheer panic of a parasite realizing the host body had died. "You really did it," Bianca whispered, her voice cracking with fear. "You locked everything. How am I supposed to live? I have a baby. Zara, I have no cash. I do not even have money to put gas in the car to get home. I looked down at my sister shivering in the night air, her mascara running down her face in dark rivulets. You do not need to worry about gas, Bianca, I replied, my voice calm but freezing. Because that luxury SUV is registered to Hunter Shell Company. The bank is sending a tow truck to repossess it in the morning. Welcome to reality. It is a place where money does not magically appear, and stupidity always comes with a very high price tag. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta smells like old floor wax and stale anxiety. It is a place where egos go to die, and 6 months after the dinner party that ended the Jenkins family dynasty, I stood in the back of courtroom 4B to watch the final burial. Hunter stood before the judge. The Italian silk suits were gone, replaced by a baggy orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. The Rolex was gone, replaced by steel shackles. He looked smaller. Without the money and the arrogance to prop him up, he was just a terrified man who had gambled his life on a lie and lost. The judge did not mince words. He called Hunter a predator. He called the scheme a sophisticated betrayal of trust. And then he delivered the number that would define the rest of Hunter's life. 12 years. 12 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. There was no parole in the federal system. Hunter would be a middle-aged man with nothing to his name by the time he saw the outside world again. He did not scream or fight this time. He just slumped forward, his forehead touching the defense table, letting out a sound that was half sob and half whimper. But the hardest part of the day was not watching Hunter fall. It was watching my mother survive. She sat in the front row, her hands clutching a tissue, her back hunched. She was not in handcuffs. She was not wearing a jumpsuit. She was free, but she had paid a terrible price for that freedom. I had spent weeks in meetings with the U.S. Attorney's Office, trading on every favor I had and leveraging my reputation as a forensic investigator to keep her out of prison. We had to paint a picture of her that destroyed her pride to save her life. We argued diminished capacity. We argued that she was a senile, elderly woman manipulated by a younger predator. We argued that she was too incompetent to understand the crimes she was committing. The prosecutor agreed, but the government demanded its pound of flesh. They seized her personal accounts. They seized the jewelry that had been bought with laundered funds. They seized the investments held in the shell companies. She walked out of that courthouse with no criminal record, but she also walked out with 0 assets. We drove home in silence. When we walked into the estate, the house felt different. It was no longer her kingdom. It was property of the trust. She went to the kitchen and made tea, her hands shaking as she filled the kettle. She turned to me, and for the first time in my life, she looked at me not with judgment, but with fear. I need to go to the pharmacy, Zara, she said softly, staring at the floor. My prescription is ready. It is $40. I looked at her. The woman who used to spend $40 on a single lipstick without blinking was now asking permission for medicine. I pulled out the trust debit card. I will call it in and pay for it over the phone, Mom, I said gently but firmly. I will have them deliver it. She nodded, swallowing the humiliation. She realized then that prison has many forms. She was not behind bars, but she was living in a cage of her own making. I was her warden, and I was her provider. I had saved her from the government, but I had captured her in a dependency she could never escape. She was safe, she was housed, but the power had shifted forever. The queen was dead. Long live the trustee. The fluorescent lights of the Super Saver Mart buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency, casting a sickly green pallor over the rows of canned vegetables and generic cereal boxes. It was a place my sister would have previously refused to enter without a hazmat suit. She used to say that polyester blends gave her a rash, and that waiting in line was for people who did not value their time. Now she was standing behind Register 4, wearing a bright blue vest made of pure synthetic misery, scanning items for a woman who was arguing over a 50-cent coupon for cat litter. I stood in the adjacent aisle, holding a bottle of sparkling water, watching the scene unfold through a gap in the display of potato chips. It had been 6 months since the arrest, but looking at Bianca, it felt like a decade. The blonde highlights were grown out, revealing dark roots she could no longer afford to color. Her nails, once talons of perfectly manicured acrylic, were short and chipped. But it was her eyes that held the biggest change. The arrogance was gone, scoured away by the abrasive reality of minimum wage. They were dull, tired, and filled with a simmering resentment that had nowhere to go. The customer slammed a bag of frozen peas onto the conveyor belt, yelling about a pricing error. I watched Bianca flinch. The old Bianca would have thrown the peas back. The old Bianca would have called the manager and demanded the customer be banned. This Bianca just mumbled an apology, her head bowed, and keyed in the override code. She looked defeated. She looked like exactly what she was. A single mother with no skills, no degree, and a husband in federal prison, trying to keep a roof over her head. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly on the linoleum. I could have gone to her line. I could have said hello. I could have offered to buy her groceries. But charity without change is just enabling. And Bianca had not changed. She had just been cornered. I moved toward the automatic doors, and as I passed Register 4, she looked up. Our eyes locked. For a second, the noise of the store faded. I saw the flash of recognition, followed immediately by a wave of burning shame. She started to open her mouth, maybe to say my name, maybe to ask for help, maybe to curse me. But I did not slow down. I did not smile. I did not frown. I looked at her with the polite, indifferent recognition one gives to a vague acquaintance from high school. I looked through her. I pushed my sunglasses up the bridge of my nose and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the sound of the beeping scanner. We were strangers now, separated not by distance but by choices. She had chosen the lie, and I had chosen the truth. And in the end, the truth is a lonely but peaceful road. The real estate sharks called me for months. They offered $25 million, then 30. They told me I was sitting on a gold mine and that I was foolish to let such prime coastal property sit idle. They did not understand that to me, this house was not an asset on a balance sheet. It was a crime scene that needed to be purified. I did not sell the estate. I did not move in and fill the closets with designer clothes like Bianca had dreamed of doing. Instead, I opened the doors to the contractors. For 6 months, the sound of saws and hammers replaced the silence of the old mansion. We stripped away the heavy velvet curtains that blocked the light. We sanded down the dark, oppressive mahogany floors until they were the color of warm honey. We turned the ballroom where my mother used to host her vanity galas into a seminar space. We turned the guest suites into safe, temporary housing. I filed the paperwork to rezone the property not as a private residence, but as a nonprofit organization. I walked through the finished hallway, running my hand along the smooth plaster. The air smelled of fresh paint and sea salt. Above the entrance, a modest bronze plaque read, "The Otis Jenkins Center for Financial Independence." It was a sanctuary for women recovering from financial abuse. It was a place for women who had been controlled by husbands who hid assets, women who had been tricked into signing documents they did not understand, Women who, like my mother, had been groomed to be helpless, but who, unlike my mother, were ready to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. I walked into the library. This was the room where Hunter had claimed to find the forged codicil. It was the room where the lie had been born. Now it was filled with computers and rows of books on financial literacy law and accounting. I stood in the center of the room and felt a profound sense of peace. I had exorcised the ghosts. I had taken a weapon of greed and forged it into a shield for the vulnerable. My grandfather would not have wanted his legacy to be a pile of cash for his descendants to squander. He would have wanted this. He would have wanted his name to mean something more than just a line on a deed. I stepped out through the French doors onto the stone terrace. The sun was beginning to set, casting a long golden path across the churning gray water of the Atlantic. The wind was strong today. It whipped my hair around my face and pressed my clothes against my body. It was cold and bracing. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, sharp air. I was alone. My phone was silent. There were no frantic texts from Bianca begging for money. There were no manipulative voicemails from my mother. There were no threats from Hunter. The noise of their dysfunction had finally been silenced. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. I looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the sea in a perfect, unbroken line. I was the trustee. I was the guardian. And for the first time in my life, I was free. They tell us that family is the ultimate sanctuary. They tell us that blood is thicker than water and that loyalty is the currency of love. But they never tell you what to do when the sanctuary becomes a prison. They never tell you that sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones bleeding you dry. For years, I thought my role in this life was to be the fixer. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I cleaned up enough messes and paid enough bills, I would finally purchase their affection. I treated their love like an investment, hoping that one day it would yield a return. But I learned the hard way that you cannot audit a heart that is bankrupt. You cannot balance the books with people who only know how to steal. Hunter and Bianca, and even my mother, viewed me not as a person, but as a resource, a line item on a spreadsheet to be exploited until it reached zero. Breaking away from them was not a simple decision. It was an amputation. It was the painful, terrifying act of cutting off a limb to save the body. It hurt. It still hurts sometimes, in the quiet moments. But the pain of healing is different from the pain of dying. We are taught to fear being alone. We are taught that a broken family is a failure. But I am here to tell you that toxicity does not deserve a seat at your table just because it has a familiar face. Real strength is not enduring abuse for the sake of appearances. Real strength is looking at the people you are supposed to love and realizing that you love yourself more. It is realizing that your dignity is not a negotiable asset. This house standing on this cliff is no longer a symbol of what my family pretended to be. It is a symbol of what we can become when we stop lying to ourselves. I built this center to teach women that financial literacy is self-defense. Understanding your worth is not just about money. It is about knowing that you have the right to say no. You have the right to ask questions. And you have the right to walk away from any deal that costs you your soul. The wind out here is cold, but it is clean. Standing on your own 2 feet is scary. There is no one to blame when you stumble. There is no safety net woven from lies. But there is also no weight on your shoulders. There is no shadow over your future. I look out at the horizon, and for the first time, I do not see a storm coming. I see clarity. My name is Zara Jenkins. I am a forensic accountant. I am a trustee. And for the first time in my life, my ledger is perfectly balanced. Zara Jenkins's journey reveals a profound truth. Financial literacy is not just about numbers. It is the ultimate form of self-defense. We often tolerate toxicity under the guise of family loyalty, but true strength lies in recognizing when those bonds become chains. Zara proved that integrity is a long-term investment that never depreciates, while greed is a liability that eventually crashes. Walking away from those who exploit you, even if they share your blood, is not an act of betrayal, but an act of survival. Your dignity is the one asset you must never trade away. Take control of your own narrative. Start building your financial independence today.